Right now, we are actually seeing liquidity conditions start to increase in the markets again. And for a little grade A hopium here on the Bitcoin price, you can see that the previous setup in terms of liquidity conditions that looked similar to this was 2017, going into 2017 and the massive run up to the end of 2017 there. I've been hearing people say that for various different reasons, including this one here, that we're looking at maybe a price cycle like 2017. I've also heard, for lots of good reasons as well, that maybe we're out of these halving driven price cycles, right? The amount of Bitcoin that's being put out into the system now is minuscule in terms of the amount that already exists. It was a lot back in the first epoch and second epoch, third epoch. Now we're talking about a small percentage of Bitcoin against the existing supply that's already been distributed. So that's one good reason. Another one, we're in a much more advanced sort of market for Bitcoin now. It's a player on the global financial stage, right? Major nation states, the biggest nation states, is talking about buying and accumulating Bitcoin. We know other nation states are mining and accumulating Bitcoin. Obviously, we've got ETFs. The big financial companies around the world are embracing Bitcoin to various degrees. So now that makes a different market for Bitcoin. And there's different fundamentals and different pushes and pulls around what's going on. And the halving cycles may not be driving it nearly as much as they used to for all of those reasons. So what do you think, Stephen? Is it possible that we might be seeing some kind of 2017 like run up because of these liquidity conditions? We get a bunch of cash into the system and you get pumps into Bitcoin and we see some kind of blow off top? Or are you thinking, like we've talked about quite a bit on the show, are we entering into more of this less volatile kind of stair stepping up, lower, smaller lows, smaller highs?
So that's a great question. And I think there's a few important ways to answer it. I'm definitely not ruling out like a relatively explosive move higher. In fact, all of these stresses and all of these tectonic monetary shifts add probability to that. So you could definitely see that. What I'm going to push back on is I'm actually the most against and most strongly opposing the kind of 4-year cycle thing that I've ever been in my life. And so the idea that we're getting a 2017 cycle, no, I completely reject that. And I completely reject the reasoning behind that. Could we see a move that maybe resembles it? Sure. But is that going to be followed by something like the 2018 bear market? I think almost certainly no. We are in uncharted territories for Bitcoin, and it has shown us this again and again. I had some tweets maybe during this process that if you told me 2 years ago that the S&P would be down close to 15% in 3 days, the most it's ever fallen, and you asked me how much would Bitcoin be down, I would have said 40%. Bitcoin would have been down 40%. Instead, it was down, I think, like the same. It was down like 15%. That is already a historic divergence from the world we've been living in. And you've seen this time and time again. We're at 84 right now. This isn't a bad price. This is, if I had told you at the beginning of 2024 that by April 2025, we were at 84K, you would have been thrilled. And because it's a good price, Bitcoin is up and it has really weathered this has been a financial crisis in some ways. This has been a historic crisis. And you have seen individual stocks fallen like the most they ever have in the fastest manner they've ever have. I can point to numerous highly profitable, world-leading, high-quality tech companies that are down more than Bitcoin. That's almost never been true. So I think we're in a completely different territory, and I think that continues, and we're all going to find out together, what that really means and looks like.
Yeah, I think there's been a couple narratives before, probably a few years ago, people saying Bitcoin has never seen a recession as of yet. And just having these little signs of a large market downturn and Bitcoin standing up so well proves that point that it's going to do pretty dang well. Even if we do dip down further or get official recession, it probably still stands up extremely well. And I think that a lot of it comes down to your point that 4-year cycles probably going to be different here as the market participants are different. We're not seeing a high level of involvement from retail as prior. Most of the Bitcoin market was made up of retail, but we have many institutions coming into play, whether it's corporations or different investment funds, pensions, etc. So there's a lot of different factors to consider, and I 100% agree with you.
100%. It's just a really unique environment to find ourselves in. So one of the things I've always disagreed with the Bitcoin community about pretty heavily, and something I'm starting to change my tune on. So wait till I get to the end of it. You'll be happier with where this ends than where it begins. I have always been very skeptical of this idea that you're just going to run into this moment where like suddenly, all of a sudden, the world kind of reprices in Bitcoin or anything approximating this, just that Bitcoin goes 0 to 100 and becomes a critical part of the financial system. I've always been someone that says that I think that's extremely unlikely. It's going to be gradual. It's going to be over a long period of time. And this isn't me saying I'm now saying, oh yeah, US dollar is going to zero, hyper Bitcoinization, anything like that. But what I do believe now is I think the odds are the highest they've ever been that by the end of this year, Bitcoin will play something resembling an important part of global finance. That doesn't mean it's the only thing. That doesn't mean fiat currencies disappear. But on a nation state level, Bitcoin will have something resembling a strategic role. And I think the odds of that actually basically going 0 to 100 this year are the highest they've ever been.
You know, to that point, I saw a conversation within the last couple of days where Senator Lummis is alluding to this idea that regardless of whether the SBR passes into law or not at a congressional level, we did have the executive order that created an SBR, so to speak. It's not formed in law yet, but she was alluding to that we may actually move towards purchasing that $1 million worth of Bitcoin, whether the law passes or not. And that kind of dovetails into this thing I saw from Standard & Poor's, where they're basically saying that if the U.S. starts buying Bitcoin in size, that the rest of the world will follow.
Correct.
I thought that was fascinating.
Correct. Almost certainly. I think that's almost certainly right, that like they will follow.
They have to. That's the game theory of it. It's great to see it recognized in that kind of a publication.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bitcoiners have been talking about this forever at this point. And on the show here, we've been saying it's going to require the buy. The buy is what's important. The creation of the SBR is one thing. It seemed like the market had that priced in, but the buy is important. And I think there's two levels of the buy. I've said this before, but I'm just going to repeat it real quick. Two levels of the buy. One is the executive branch finds budget neutral ways to buy Bitcoin. That's what's happening right now. Trump tasked his team to find budget neutral ways for the executive branch to move money around so that it can apply it to Bitcoin. But they cannot make a huge move because Congress controls the budget. Yep. So there's a little wiggle room for the executive. But the Bitcoin Act, that's where the big money is. And if the United States passes the Bitcoin Act and pledges to accumulate Bitcoin for 20 years or accumulate and hold Bitcoin for 20 plus years, that's it. What do you do? If you're running a nation, any other nation on this planet, the most powerful nation on earth says Bitcoin is a strategic asset and we have a plan to acquire as much as we possibly can, basically. So I don't see how that could not set off the suddenly phase of Bitcoin adoption.
Correct. And especially when this is all centered in this administration vocally and directly discussing Triffin's dilemma. They are wrangling with Triffin's dilemma here. They are saying there is a cost to the US dollar dominance in the world that is borne by American citizens. And we are now renegotiating that monetary order. So that's the thing I'm very supportive of when I look at what's going on. Now, it's a very different question. Have they gone about that in the right way and the most tactical way and those sorts of things, right? So, yeah, that's harder to feel. But they are negotiating this monetary order. And it's hard to imagine a solution which isn't improved by including a neutral reserve asset at some level. This doesn't mean no more dollars. It doesn't even mean that the dollar isn't the dominant currency in the world. But the more you can have a neutral reserve asset to settle certain trade balances, you can get certain benefits from that. And so I think the hope is real and the path is the clearest it's ever been for Bitcoin to actually play a pivotal role in the global monetary order.
Here's another thought is that you can't really tariff a Bitcoin transaction, not unless it's done voluntarily. You know, how much of a wake-up call is it when the current administration comes out with the announcements of tariffs, retracts that, puts it back in a different way, says, okay, the rest of you guys don't have to do this, it's 10%, but China is going to be like massively tariffed. So, I mean, this has been a whiplash kind of effect in markets. Can you just imagine what it would be like being a sovereign with all of your largest corporations and all of your largest industries coming to you complaining about what's happening and then trying to figure out, okay, there is this neutral asset that we could use for global trade that will not be tariffed. What about all that?
Correct.
And
Do you
I mean,
think that
there's,
will ever be a thing where countries are like trading with each other to avoid?
this is another thing that we saw this week, right, guys? The reports that Russia and China are settling some energy trades using Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I think this kind of went under the radar this week, but yeah, there are reports that it seems somewhat credible that this is happening. Let's see.
Oh, that's right. That was a Van Eck report.
So
earlier
yeah,
this week.
Russia's oil trade was valued at 192 billion last year and growing. Yeah, that was in a Van Eck report. So there you go. It is happening. It does make sense that it would happen.
Yeah. So I think there's two things there. There's like using Bitcoin to settle trade, which like Vanek did report on that. And there's also circumventing tariffs, which was what part of your question made me think about, Alex, was like, and 100%, like that's already a prominent thing. And that's why I said that the US needs to have our allies behind us. If the EU allows China to export goods to the EU, and even more so if they route through there, the tariffs are pointless. The tariffs are effectively pointless. Like the Chinese exports are all stuff, things. Like if you ship them to the EU and then they ship them to the US, that doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It's nothing.
Think about that.
We need the EU to stand with the US if we have any hope of putting pressure on China. Different question altogether. Is that the approach we should take? How should we do it? But if that's the approach we're taking, we need them to not just be the release valve for US tariffs.